Thank you to the Basel Declaration for having me here. I apologize for the long title, Minimizing the Influence of the Animal Rights Narrative with Increased Transparency and Visibility. An example from Portugal. It does have a spoiler in the title because it presents a solution that I will mention in the end. But firstly, there's this misconception that in Portugal everybody is okay with animal experimentation, but if we look at the actual data from it, we see that those who approve are actually less than the EU average, and more people totally disagree with animal experimentation, for instance, than in the UK. Also, a large percentage have not yet formed an opinion on animal experimentation, and this, of course, opens the room for influence by animal rights movements. And although there is no work on primates in Portugal, although there is no work on dogs or cats in Portugal, other than in the clinical setting, this Portuguese political party, who almost had a member of parliament elected, used chimpanzees and beagles to say, you are responsible for the torture, dismemberment and slow death of thousands of dogs, rats and monkeys every year, and you aren't even aware of it. So the intellectual dishonesty, not to call it an outright lie, is the normal modus operandi for a political party there. So how worried should we be in Portugal, actually? Animal rights groups have not been in any way connected with violent acts, and I think this is a very positive thing. However, their rhetoric is quite similar to any other animal rights activist groups. So they claim it is torture, that it is driven by profit, not only by corporations, but I really don't understand this. They say that researchers themselves benefit in some way from using animals. Everybody here using animals knows how much it costs and drives up costs of research, that it is scientific fraud and that there are alternatives available and we just are unwilling to adopt them. No translation needed because the pictures speak for themselves, but this is from the Portuguese most active animal rights association, and they say animal experimentation equals scientific fraud and the massacre of innocents. Again, from this institution, animal experimentation, violence in the name of science, and they claim that in Portugal, animal use for experimenting is actually an uncontrolled reality. And I've actually debated these people. I've been a moderator in the debate, and it was really hard for me to be not to choose sides. Again, primates, dogs. We don't use primates or dogs, but their idea is that no one cares about rodents, although I do. So they use them to gather support against animal research. And although we don't engage in any violent actions, it has to do a lot with our culture. When activists raided a research institute in Milan and in Brazil, the Portuguese Animal Rights Association said, congratulations activists, Portugal is proud of you. So around 14,000 people, but only 11,000 were validated, signed the DCI Stop Vivisection, which was actually stop regulation of animal research. So the question is, did they actually know what this petition was about? And of course, the most vocal organizations, this Party for Animals, the Associação Animal, their main focus has been bullfighting and the abandonment of companion animals. but they are also the most inflexible anti-vivisectionists. And they are really vague when they're campaigning for animals. So they hold these marches for animals, support for animal welfare, and they just slip in opposition to animal research. So in the eyes of the public, this makes opposition to animal experimentation as much a worthy cause as the abandonment of companion animals or bullfighting. So they put it in the same level. So this picture, basically, this was a protest against bullfighting, so you'll get the odd person protesting there against animal experimentation as well. They had a history of success in Portugal. The plataforma de objeção ao biotério, the platform to object the building of an animal facility. So they petitioned against it, and this was supposed to be a very large facility. The numbers that they were speaking of were around 35 million euros. And they ended up having an unfavorable ruling that, of course, was unfavorable to the center. We are talking about 20 to 30 people, and they met with all the political parties represented in the Portuguese Parliament, and they were, of course, the main drivers for Resolução da Assembleia da República, this legislation that tried to enforce new regulation of animal use, but most of it was redundant with the enactment of the directive. But this resolution also called upon the building of a 3R center rather than this breeding facility, which actually I agree, because we didn't need one. And one researcher that uses animals, of course, at my institute went to the Portuguese Parliament, and he said, we actually don't need this. Use the money to fund neurosciences, to fund any other kind of science, but they've seen this as a victory for them rather than a victory of common sense. What scares me the most is that this very small group of influential people have had access to the corridors of power, so they were actually invited by the competent authority to help create ethics committees in labs. This was prior to the directive. We didn't have mandatory ethics committees in institutes, which was, of course, as you might understand, a problem. So they were just asked to pitch in and give their opinion. And why? Because they were the only people talking about animal experimentation. So instantly they become the reference, because they are the sole voice. We don't have a Portuguese anti-vivisectionist society per se, but there is an NGO who has been particularly dedicated to opposing animal research. They call themselves the Sociedade Portuguesa para a Educação Humanitária. So they have this national link with the Jane Goodall Institute, with Internich, that have alternatives to animal use in teaching. And these are basically composed by a few academics and several college students, but they hold the only international meeting on alternatives in Portugal, this activist group. So not scientists, but activists have a Congress on alternatives, and this concerns me. It probably says more about the inertia of scientists in Portugal than of their activity, of the activity of the activists. So several members were linked with the previous the platform that I talked about previously, and they have been linked to numerous petitions to stop animal research based mainly on science denialism and half-truths and disinformation. And they proposed the Declaration of Lisbon. And this is, although they seem irrelevant, they managed to get very high-profile people to persons to subscribe to this Declaration of Lisbon. And what do they say? Firstly, that they say that the returns on investment in animal research are increasingly meager. They propose that independent, expert, third-party animal ethics committees, meaning them, should also oversee animal use. They ask for a more realistic and evidence-based estimate of the likely costs and benefits. Again, most of it is, when you look on one perspective, is really redundant with the directive, but what they are trying to stress is that they want to be involved in how research is carried out in Portugal. And this is the most outlandish part, that experimental animals should be filmed at all times and the parties should have the option to view any footage they wish. So this is pretty much an Orwellian dystopia here. I won't even address the unfeasibility of it all, but just the image that it portrays of scientists as something, as a group that should be under surveillance 24 hours should definitely concern us. And the person that represented the Portuguese competent authority signed this, and João Barroso from the European Commission also signed this, and Philip Lowe, very well-renowned scientist on animal consciousness, proposed and signed this. So my question is, were they aware of what they were signing? Or do they actually mean this? So now there's a petition underway for enforcing this Declaration of Lisbon. Good luck with that. So I think it's about time to step down from the ivory tower and recognize that there is a problem, and scientists in Portugal have been very autistic and basically pretend that this isn't an issue, and they won't wake up the sleeping tiger. So at my institute, we decided to talk openly about this. So we have written letters. We have written this op-ed. So this is Anna Olsen, my boss. I participated with 2 other scientists from the Portuguese Laboratory Animal Science Association in response to this Declaration of Lisbon, and stating how outlandish these claims are, and stressing how highly regulated animal research is in Portugal and in the rest of Europe. I've been blogging for the last 6 years on animal welfare, ethics, and I blog a lot about animal research. And this is actually a post about scientific science denialism and other fallacies. We've been engaged in debate, so this is the head of our institute's animal facility debating one of the persons from the Plataforma de Objeção ao Abiutério and Animal, and also from this SPED. I've been giving interviews on laboratory animal welfare. We have been taping a documentary for Portuguese public television. I actually can't show you the footage because they said I don't own the rights to it, although I'm in 90% of it. So I actually have a picture of them filming me, which I took. And we have school visits, so I talk to around 250 to 300 students, high school students every year. And what I tell them is that it's not my intention to indoctrinate them. It's not what I'm trying to do. I'm an animal welfare scientist. I work on the 3 R's, and I understand the profound dilemma between the expected benefits from research at the harm caused to animals, but the idea is to be transparent and to give them credible, sound information and allow them to make their own minds based on that information, rather than just telling students what they should think. And we work in collaboration with teachers, so the students, when they get there, they already had debated this in their schools. My institute has a public statement on animal research, but it's the only institute in Portugal that has this. It's not the same as transparency, but it's a good step towards it. And there's another good example for another research institute, where in a book about stem cell research, also a hard topic to talk about, they mention animal research and the importance of animal research within the context of scientific research as a whole. So this is also important, I think, to not just talk about animal research per se, but just when you are reporting and talking about your own research, mention that you have used animals and how animals are important. So it provides a context. So in short, the bad news is that many researchers and most private and public research centers have a non-disclosure approach on the topic, that animal rights groups have a few, but they are resourceful, and they have a history of having access to the public, the media, and to decision makers, oddly enough. There is neither a Portuguese society for the 3 Rs, nor a scientific society for animal welfare, or for advocating for science. So basically activists have just taken the empty space, and they work there in the empty space, and they are the authorities on this. So there has been little to no dialogue between scientists, the public, and animal advocacy groups, as you, of course, may imagine. The good news is that animal rights advocates are peaceful and law-abiding, that terrorism is inexistent, and chances are it will continue to be so. And this is a golden opportunity to reach out to moderate groups and establish dialogue and cooperation, and also to be proactive, and rather than trying to do damage control and being reactive to what happens beyond our control. So we have the time, the means, and the opportunity to educate the public on the benefits of research. Thank you very much for listening. I'd just like to present you the beautiful city of Porto and our new institute, to which we are moving next month. I have all my things in boxes now, and I'm very excited and visit us in Portugal. Thank you.
Is there questions to Nuno?
Hello. Really nice talk and very interesting. However, in the early part of your talk, you mentioned the use of non-human primates, dogs, cats, and you responded by saying, well, we don't do that in Portugal. And of course, it's very tempting to, thank you, very tempting to point out any inaccuracies in what the animal rights organisations are saying. But of course, if we're taking a European-wide perspective, that needs to be included where it's scientifically necessary and justified. And I think that it would be helpful to adjust the rhetoric on that, because most of these animal rights organisations are communicating very strongly between one country and another. Many of the phrases you took from the animal rights literature are very familiar to me from the UK. Yeah. They're exactly the things that have been said in the UK.
They basically copy and paste it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for your comment. The thing is, these were used to illustrate a petition for regulating animal research in Portugal. So they were using, of course, images of chimpanzees, and the use of chimpanzees is really severely limited in Europe, and chimpanzees and dogs to address animal research in Portugal. Of course, when we have to mention that these animals are indeed used across Europe, and rightly so.
I understand that, and there is always a local situation, but there is also an ethical point that, and I think we should not let the ethical high ground slip away from us, that if we think these things are justified on scientific grounds, then they are also therefore justified on ethical grounds. The two are not distinguishable, really. And that, I think, needs to be brought across.
Yes, and as a specialist in rodent welfare, I'm actually mad at them because I put rats and dogs in the same plane. Because so basically, I say, why don't you consider rats to be as important as dogs, for instance, or cats or any other? Yeah.
I would say this is maybe an issue because we have at the end, we have a Q&A session and general discussion that we can elaborate more. But I also have problems that dogs and cats, and for example, in comparison to pigs, are treated different in people's mind. I mean, as from the scientific point of view, there is not much difference between a cat and a dog and a pig. And most people will mind less if you do research on a pig or you eat it, but they would never eat the cat and the dog, and this is because cats and dogs and also primates are no longer considered animals but human companions. So I think this is, I think, a very difficult issue, and I think also, of course, you have to see the European scale, but then you also have to see the national scale. This is what we had in the first two talks. So I think you have, and we should network at the European level, but you also have to obviously deal with the national specific problems.
Let me just add something. We should be very careful when stating, but we are only using rodents. I saw that one of the sentences that they used to change people's minds were that most animals used were actually rodents, and we should be very careful with that because rats matter as well. Yeah, or as much.
We all, each of us from a different country only thinks that it's our local problem. Actually, it's not a local problem for our opponents because, as you said, they communicate very well. And actually, many of them also in Poland are fed and financed from the UK. So it's a European problem, and we should, although in Poland, for example, we do not research on primates, I never say that it's thing that we won't touch. I always voice for that importance of this research. We just don't have money to research on primates. That's the point.
And actually, it's cowardice to say those are the ones who use primates. We are the good guys. We don't. So it's really dangerous to go down that path, in my opinion.
Okay. Is there more questions? Otherwise, yeah?
So I was interested in hearing this aspect of the professionalization of the cost-benefit process that is brought up in this Lisbon Declaration. Because I know actually in Switzerland this is a topic that is currently under debate as well, in terms of, you know, how to value basic research, because it's not clear that basic research is going to lead to a benefit for humankind. In particular, a particular piece of research that is done. So, you know, a more formal version of this cost-benefit procedure might be desirable, but it's just very hard to put a price tag on scientific progress. So I don't know what your position is on that, or your organization.
I think we should reconsider our definition of benefit, because what we are selling is that animal research has given us medical benefits. But of course this allows activists to say, but only a small percentage of animal research actually translates into clinical benefit. But scientific knowledge by itself is a benefit. Knowing, for instance, that a given drug doesn't work is almost as valuable as knowing that one does. So we should be very careful with how we present benefit, because when we say, well, 8% of the drugs worked and just a small percentage of this actually translated. But we know that the others don't. And this is valuable information. What we actually should be concerned about is the likelihood of benefit, which is now a factor for harm-benefit evaluation if you see the guidance documents by the European Commission. So we had the Bateson Square with harm and benefit. We have now a new dimension, the likelihood of benefit. This has to do with soundness of research and the likeliness, the likelihood that we will get sound results from science. And this is a major problem because most research in animals and by any other methods doesn't follow through best practice and is therefore unreproducible and unreliable. And this should be our concern, mainly. Yeah.
Okay, then I think we all have earned our coffee break, so we break here, and we